Okay.
Hi, Shirley here, and today I'm with another episode of Spirit of Matter, where I'm meeting Kira Ryberg, who is a Hellenistic astrologer, and I'm very, very, very excited to meet you and talk with you. Before I ask you all the million questions that I have in mind about the ninth house and stuff, I'd really love you to tell our viewers what is it that you do for people who are very new to astrology. What's Hellenistic astrology, and how did you get to do that? What do you love most doing about doing that?
Yeah. Okay. Just a quick correction. My name's Kira, for everybody listening, not Kyra, but don't worry. It happens all the time. No worries.
Okay.
So I'm a traditional astrologer who uses Hellenistic techniques. And I kind of found astrology at a very, interesting time in my life, as I think most astrologers tend to. I was going through a loosing of the bond, which, if you're familiar with Hellenistic astrology and Zodiacal Releasing, it kind of marks a major transition in your life and kind of takes you from one direction and puts you on an entirely different one. And that was exactly what happened to me in the midst of the pandemic and everything. So I've always been interested in astrology. I think it's kind of one of those things that follows you throughout your life until you take it seriously when you're meant to be doing this kind of work. And I was always, reading my horoscopes and making my friends download CoStar before I really knew the tradition. And then I just started getting really, really interested in it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I just kind of dove in, and weirdly, strangely, because I think most people start with modern astrology, and I almost started with traditional. So I maybe studied modern for a month or two and then just dove right in to traditional and Hellenistic. I found the astrology podcast, and that really informed my studies. And then I just loved Chris Brennan's style. I feel like maybe it's because we both have Aquarius moons, but I really relate to the way that he is. And so I ended up taking his Hellenistic courses. And so that was kind of how I got like my formal studying and training and everything. And then now I do mostly client work. So I do consultations, mostly birth chart readings. And then I'm just kind of tinkering around with some other offerings right now that I hope I'll have ready to go soon, just trying them out with clients and stuff.
This is amazing. Of course, in the end, I will let you present your offerings to the people, like in more detail. The first thing that was really interesting for me, first is like you began to do readings in 2020, right? During the pandemic.
Yes.
This is so exciting, and it's it's an honor for me to be the person that you show up on their show first. And this is also something really important because, like you said, many astrologers used to study modern and then go back to the traditional, and back with podcasts like the astrology podcast, people are actually being exposed to traditional first, and that grows a very it's a new generation of astrologers who will be exposed to traditional astrology first. So I'm curious to see what's it going to be. What's it going to be like?
It's a completely different way to inform your entire studies, I think, and maybe a bit more, I don't know if complicated is the right word, because I think they're equally complex in their own right, but it's definitely a different way to approach it through that more historical traditional lens. And so having that kind of define my practice, I liked that process a lot. And then I still want to dive in more to the modern and learn that now that I've kind of got the basics under the belt, which is really, it's a fun process because it never ends. You just can always learn more and more, and it's kind of never ending.
Yeah, and you said the word loosening of the bond,
Yes.
which is actually kind of new to me. I know just a bit about Hellenistic astrology, and so for the sake of our viewers who don't know what it is, would you like to explain the term?
Yeah, of course. So it's kind of operates within the greater context of zodiacal releasing, which is an ancient Time Lord technique for people who don't know. And it kind of, to use Chris Brennan's metaphor, it breaks down the life into chapters of a book. And then from there, we can break down those chapters even further. And if we want to use that analogy, we could say we can break it down into pages and paragraphs and sentences. And using that technique, we can kind of see when the most important moments in the life are going to happen, when that's going to feel the most active, and when those become activated in your chart. And then we can also go a bit deeper and see if those will be experienced positively or as something more challenging. So it's a really complex technique. I think his lecture on it is 18 hours. So it's a very complex technique, but it's so fascinating to me. It's probably the thing that I like the most and I'm the most drawn to in astrology right now. And within that technique, there is this thing called the loosing of the bond. And the way I like to describe it to clients, it's like you're walking along a path and you're happy and you think everything is going good. And then someone picks you up and turns you on the other way and you just start walking in the exact opposite direction. And it indicates a major life shift. And it's normally incredibly obvious to the person. And this period lasts typically like a year or 2 years, depending on which kind of which sign is being activated and how long that period is. And so I had mine, and I had just graduated from university right before, I think a week before my period started. And then I was planning on going into social media for corporations and doing, you know, completely different thing. And then the pandemic got really serious. I currently live in Paris, but obviously I'm not French by my accent. And so finding a job in a foreign country where you're not super fluent in the middle of a pandemic, not an easy task. And so I was really running into challenges with that. And I just had friends kind of convince me to give readings. So I was doing them for, you know, $20 or something really ridiculous at the time. And yeah, now I just left that loosing of the bond period back in April. And within that whole time frame is kind of when I got really serious about it, really started studying it, took Chris Brennan's course, finished Chris Brennan's course, and then came out of that on the other side as a consulting astrologer. So major life change that happens under that loosing of the bond period.
It is so amazing, you know, because for me, I also had a period where I left academia, and it was very sudden. Like my body simply, I was about to sign back, and my body simply, I literally could not. So that was, I don't know if it would be the Zodiacal Releaseing. I just saw the like the YouTube lecture, which was about 4 hours. So I guess it looks very deep. But I remember the power of the decision, you know, when you think you're going to one direction and life takes you on a completely different road.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to throw up your hands and let fate take the wheel, but that would kind of drive us into that whole fate versus free will conversation.
Really. Yeah, I mean, in the pandemic and, you know, the situation of finding a new job and starting to do readings, like really for survival, basically.
Yeah, it was, I don't think I would have done them as quickly as I did. I have such bad imposter syndrome. I think I would have waited forever, honestly, which is also kind of why I believe it happened at that time. Because I think if it didn't, I wouldn't have ever offered readings. And the way that it kind of developed was so sudden. I was just reading for friends for free, as I think most people do, you know, friends and family members for a while. And then I had a friend actually just send a message into her group chat, was like, I have a friend who's astrologer, like who wants a cheap reading? And I did not know she did that. And then she's like, I have 2 clients for you. And I was like, you have what now? And this is so Jupiter in my 7th house conjunct my descendant. And so just having like this lucky little thing. And then from there, they really enjoyed the readings, I guess. And they told people, and then it just kind of snowballed out of control. And before I knew it, I was just doing it, and super grateful to be doing this work at such a fast pace, but it definitely makes me feel a little out of my depths at times.
Yeah, it is very intense, you know, and I'd really like, you know, for people watching this and watching the process of a newborn astrologer, I guess, what would you say to a person in there, you know, when they're just beginning to do that, and many people are thrown into the waters in one way or another, through one crisis or another, they're being forced to work in their path. What would you say to a person who is right now in a crisis like this?
Yeah, I would say you just kind of have to charge ahead and keep going. And there's going to be challenges and there's going to be times where you feel like it's really overwhelming. But if you feel like you're meant to be doing that thing, I think you feel that way for a reason. And you have to follow that gut feeling and that intuition and just go after it and learn as much as you can. Never stop learning as well. You know, that's a very ninth house thing for me to say,
Mm-hmm.
but never stop learning and just continue to better yourself. But I think sometimes the learning also comes from doing the thing that's scary. I learn way more in my consultations than I've learned in, you know, a book or anything like that. And it's having that human connection and talking to people that really is where I feel like the knowledge gets integrated for me. And so I think it's just having the courage to keep going and keep pressing on and try to do the hard shit, because that's why it matters and that's why it's hard. And if it was easy, it probably wouldn't feel worth it in the end.
That's well, the word that you know that it's hard, and that's what makes it so meaningful. Kind of got
Mm-hmm.
stuck in me. And when in this like worldview, and then I'm like, okay, what's in your ninth? And now I'm curious about the ninth house, because you know immediately right on Twitter you have this ninth house thingy, and I love the ninth. It's a very it's a home space for me. Everything in my chart literally connects to either studies or the ninth. So I'd love to hear your perspective of it, and why are you so in love with the ninth?
Yeah. Well, I have a ninth house stellium. So I have my sun, my moon, my Mercury, and my MC all in my ninth. And it is Aquarius, so it's ruled by Saturn. So there's that hard work aspect coming in pretty obviously right there. And I think the ninth house to me is such a special place because I think it's really where we discover ourselves. And, you know, it's the place where the sun rejoices in Hellenistic astrology. It's called the house of God. And I think a lot of times the ninth house is where we go to seek answers to those really big life questions. And to me, having so many placements, especially both my luminaries there, I'm someone who I hate small talk. I don't want to talk about the weather. I want to talk about what do you believe as a soul and like what do you think happens after we die, you know? And to me, those conversations are where we really derive meaning and where we kind of figure out where is my place in the world and where am I in all of this? And I think the ninth house kind of facilitates those conversations and it gives you methods of study, and it all kind of relates back to defining yourself and where you fit in the grand scheme of the world at large. And to me, that's such a powerful thing to have. And I just feel very connected to the ninth house.
Yeah, for me, I definitely relate. And you know, your sun is dignified there. It's in it's joy. Would you like to explain for people who don't know exactly what joy of the planets is? I know Chris Brennan wrote a beautiful article about that. But I guess, you know, for my viewers, what's that joy in the ninth? And yeah, that first, and later we'll get to the next.
Yeah. So the Planetary Joys is basically a scheme that puts the seven traditional planets into a house where they are said to rejoice. So they can produce their significations easier. They're really happy to be there. I just explain it as it's their favorite place to be in the chart. And so each planet has a different place. And for the sun, it's in the ninth. I don't know if you want to go through all of them, but Jupiter would be the 11th, Saturn in the 12th, the moon in the third, Venus in the fifth, and Mars in the sixth.
Mhm.
And so that's where their kind of favorite places to be are. So they do have a special kind of quality when they're there. And it makes them a bit stronger, but I guess I'm always focused on the fact that my sun is in detriment. So I don't think it's dignified at all. But yeah, that's kind of the Planetary Joys scheme. And yeah, Chris Brennan's paper that you mentioned, he talks about how the Planetary Joys actually were probably the basis for a lot of the house significations that we know of, and that he thinks the Planetary Joys actually came before the house significations. And I thought that was really interesting. I was actually writing something about that earlier today, so it's funny you brought that up. I was reading that paper not just but a few hours ago.
Well, it makes sense, you know. We both have something with the ninth. And I was thinking about, you know, your being a person of the ninth. I was wondering what it's like for you, your experience with clients.
Yeah, I think I also have a pretty strong seventh house. So I have Sagittarius on the cusp, and I've got Jupiter and Venus and Pluto at 0 degrees, right there. So I've got all those planets in my 7th as well, which I think really lends to consultations and having those one-on-one conversations with people. But I do feel like my consultations take on a more deep, we kind of get into it in the consults, and a lot of people come to me actually talking about travel and learning, like wanting to know if they're going to be living abroad at some point or if that's in their future. And I think as well, I do have a YouTube channel as well, and that's more about my life in Paris and stuff like that. I started that a few years ago, and so I think I attract people who watch my channel and then they come and they kind of want to know, am I going to live abroad? And so we talk a lot about foreign travel and spirituality and astrology, and I always find it funny when people come into a consultation and they're having a 9th house transit, which is nearly every time. And yeah, I think the 9th house just shows up really obviously in a lot of different ways in my life. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts of the houses. It's not just one definition, it's all of them all at once. And I really like that a lot.
That's amazing. And it leads to, so many ways that we can take it. We're probably going to go through them all. First is I would like for the people who watch this to pay attention that I know for me, from my experience, I noticed that for me, healers come to learn about alchemy, for me, readings. So people will think, oh, you need to study relationship stuff. You need to study, how to predict this, how to predict that, because people want to know about relationships. This is how you get the crowd. But it's not necessarily so. You study yourself. And then the people that are going to come to you, they will be in some way connected to your life path. So don't worry about that, right?
Yes, I completely agree. I think that shows up a lot for me as well. With just studying your own chart can teach you so much about the kind of astrologer you're going to be and the kind of clients you'll attract. And then if we want to take that to non-astrologers, that can just tell you so much about everything, if you believe that, in your life, and how to navigate the world. And I just think, I completely agree with what you said.
Yeah, and also aside of that, another important thing is you have your YouTube channel, which I'm going to link down below.
Thank you.
In addition to your website, of course, you do traveling as well. So you do travel videos.
Yeah, so I moved to France in 2016. Again, one of those things where you just feel like you have to do it and you're not going to be like, when you were explaining, my body just had to do this. That's how I felt about moving to Paris. And so I did move to Paris in 2016 and then had a little journey here and met my now husband and stayed, and then started a YouTube channel kind of about what it's like to be living abroad and stuff like that. And so I think a lot of people come to me for that kind of stuff as well now, which is so that 9th house stellium, like I'm going to leave my country and go to a place where I don't speak the language fluently and be a total outsider in every way. And so that's a really obvious way that 9th house plays out for me as well.
Wow, that is so amazing. And I think, that's another thing, that we have the astro community, which is great. And also what I'm doing with my channel is the astro community, and for us to communicate and share experience and share knowledge and empower each other in the process. But we also need to know that our clients, in the beginning, they're not going to come from the community of astrologers. Usually they're going to come from what we do in life in general.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and I'm still working at getting, a full client base, as I think many up and coming astrologers are trying to establish like a regular stream of clients and everything. And that's really where I get the bulk of my clients from, is from my channel and people who watch me there. And then they want to, I mentioned astrology. I think when it becomes so integrated in your life, it's hard to not talk about it. So even in my videos that are completely unrelated, I'm like, well, Mercury's in retrograde, so that's why I can't talk today, or not in retrograde, is retrograde. And so just little things like that. And then people get interested, check out my website, and then come and find me. And I think that's such a special connection as well, because when you can connect with people who are on the other side of the screen, that's so special to me. I think it makes it so much more real and not like you're just talking to a camera, but like you're talking to people. And then I get to meet them in the most intimate setting possible and see their charts and learn all about their lives. And that is, to me, something that I have the utmost gratitude for that. I think it's just amazing to see that play out and to meet people in such an intimate context. I think consultations are just a magical space for me.
Yeah, there's something, yeah, it takes me two roads. One, that space of consultation, and the second is being out in the open as an astrologer outside the community of the astrology, because for many of us, especially people who come from academia, people who come from more sciencey views or more materialist views, it's not so, it's not a given that you would just go outside with your peers, with your family, with your partner, even with your colleagues, and just go, oh, this happens maybe because Mars is so and so. Oh, this article about, I saw an article about the cosmos being in the donut shape, and I'm like, immediately, Uranus in Taurus.
Yeah.
But it's not a given, and there can be so much shame and fear of abandonment, sometimes real fear, because
Absolutely.
to be an astrologer or even be interested in astrology in the sciencey community, it can cost you your name and reputations and colleagues and whatnot. So how was it for you to come out as an astrologer? I'm sorry for this phrasing, maybe
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. I think I heard Chris Brennan also say that on one of his episodes, and I kind of cringed a little bit at the phrasing, but I don't know a better way to say it either. But I think for me, I've always been, that Aquarius stellium. I'm a little weird anyway. I'm a little bit on the fringe anyway. And I do care a lot what people think about me, but I also don't care at all. Like if I really love something and I'm really passionate about something, I'm going to go for it 110%. And so I think when I started getting into astrology, no one was really surprised, but I think it's still something that I'm navigating and learning how to shut that off at times and not bring that into conversation, because I see the whole world through this now. So even when one of my friends is talking about something, I'm like, this is your Mercury in Taurus, like square Mars or something, and you have to learn which people that's okay with and which people really enjoy those conversations and which people don't. And I think I tweeted the other day something like, I love ninth house friendships. And to me, that's like a ninth house friendship, is people who want to talk about that kind of stuff. They want to hear what you have to say about the astrology and everything that's going on. So I think I'm still met with some, skepticism from different people in my life. And I think that's okay. Astrology is not for everyone, and that's totally fine. We're all on our own different journeys and paths. And as long as it's a respectful exchange, that's all I care about. And when it becomes disrespectful, I just don't engage. I had some people, I had like one of my tweets when I tweeted about going and getting my certificate for the Hellenistic course. It kind of blew up a little bit, in my eyes, blew up, maybe not for people who have lots of followers. And some people randomly quote me and were like, this is everything that's wrong with society. And of course it's some white male. And I'm just like, you know what? And like something about how I'm not educated or something. I was like, I have a degree. I graduated summa cum laude. Like I am a very intelligent person, and I don't just believe everything at face value, but I think it just comes with the territory. You have to understand that people have preconceptions, and those preconceptions are based on sun sign astrology. And that's something you have to learn to navigate as an astrologer and as a person who lives by astrology, I think.
Absolutely. Because when you look at, part of what I do at Spirit of Matter, when I do charts of people who shaped our thinking, I just go into Wikipedia, I read about the person, then I make a prediction. And the prediction is not where is the sun sign, where is the ascendant, is what house lords do I expect to be activated? What houses do I expect to be dominant in the chart? What would I expect the Mercury to be like? What would I, immediately for you, I immediately subconsciously Spirit of Matter, they're like, where's the Saturn in the ninth? How is it related to that? Because the minute you said, it's hard work, and if it wasn't hard, I was like, And that's what I do. But when we do it outside with people who are not into that, and even to explain that prediction is something more holistic, it's more scientific, basically.
Yes, I agree completely.
And that can change. And the importance of, yes, speaking, voicing your voice, even for the very basics of finding clients. You have to, if you are on Facebook groups, if you are on Twitter, if you do speak in the language of astrology, so people are exposed to the fact that, oh, so and so in my relationship could have happened because outer planets to inner planets transit.
Hmm.
So and so in my life is happy. Okay, everybody knows about Mercury retrograde, yeah, but the Mars significations of last month, oh my God. you know and when you just speak it out, that's how people know that you're the astrologer person, and they might think you're weird and stay
Hmm.
away from you. But you also get to connect, when you show up in your true colors, you also get to really connect with people.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think you become that person where I don't know if this is true for you as well, but your friends are texting you like, things are really weird for me today. What's going on in the stars or what's happening with the planets? And I think that's always really cute and sweet as well, because then it's not just that they're interested in what you're interested in, but they want your opinion and they take you as a trusted source. And I think that's always really profound too. And I love getting to read for friends. I offer all my friends like a birth chart reading for their birthday now. I think it's the perfect gift. And that's been such a fun process for me to do. I've done it with almost all my friends now. And the most recent one was a total skeptic. When I offered her the reading for her birthday, she was almost like, you know, maybe not. And I was like, that's fine. Like, we don't have to. I just thought I would offer. And then about 2 weeks later, she sends me a text and is asking me to read her chart. And was like, actually, I'm kind of interested. And so we do it. And she had all these questions about the history of astrology and why isn't it recognized as something that is legitimate. And that conversation was so eye-opening for her that within 20 minutes, she was like, you've convinced me. Like, I fully believe this is real now. And I think if most people just approached it with an open mind and talked to someone who had an idea of what they were talking about, they would come to realize that it's so much deeper than sun signs. Like you were saying, it's where are the rulers and what connections are they making? What aspects are they making? What transits are happening right now? What perfection year are you in? Like so many different things that we can bring to the table that make it so much more complex than most people understand. And I think that's so special about having consultations and having that client interaction is you get to share that with them and watch them realize how profound astrology is.
Yes, and in the two words that kind of stuck in the last, I guess 10 minutes that we were talking. First, it was, of course, things of the mind, and it struck me like what kind of a ninth house conversation it is to speak with a skeptic about the history,
Yeah.
something old, Saturn in Aquarius, of astrology, and why was it not accepted? And like that, I could think of all kinds of conversations with skeptics. I would not even think that that would go to the history of astrology and why it's not accepted. So that's really cute. And you spoke about that space, that intimate space with the client, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not so discussed in the community, like that intimate space, because on the one hand, it's not, a therapist that sees the client every week and they build something together and then they get into the psyche. You see a chart. And now in your hand, the minute the person hands to you your chart, you know the probable significations of life events, the probable patterns in their intimacy, the probable kinks that they may have, the probable
Mm-hmm.
nightmares and anxieties that they may have to, like, in therapy, it goes bit by bit. And you have the models that more a bit than the client knows that but you also don't. And with astrology, it's like boom.
Yep.
And the clients, I think none of them is aware of that. I think even when we are the most, I wouldn't consider myself a professional astrologer, but I think even the most professional astrologers, when they come to read it, they don't think about it. They have to ignore that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is, on the one hand, a huge power imbalance. On the other hand, it's not like you meet every day. And then you meet them in a very intimate circumstance. So what is the experience for you with the client in that kind of, it's not even a liminal space. It's like I wouldn't say a bedroom, but a very intimate space.
Yeah, it is a very intimate space. And I think because like you said, you can see the probable significations of a lot of different aspects of their life. And then I think it's in those conversations where you start diving into, okay, but how did this play out for you specifically? Because I know how it could play out, but let's talk about the 1 in 7 billion ways that it played out for you. And I think having those conversations also helps them realize a lot of really intimate details about themselves. And I had, I mean, it's, I think one of the reasons we don't talk about it as well is because consultations are such a confidential space as
Mm-hmm.
well. And we don't want to ever, betray the trust of our clients and everything. But I have had one client who said, you made me see myself in an objective way for the first time. And you told me things that people have told me my whole life that couldn't get through because they had kind of like they had a dog in the fight. They had a bone to pick, and you don't have any reason to tell me this other than what you're seeing. And so I think for a lot of people, it can be a really validating and affirming experience. And I think when you, like you mentioned, the power imbalance that comes with that. And I think that's where you have to have really good ethics as an astrologer and know maybe when it's not appropriate to say something when you see it in the chart. And I think that's something that a lot of new astrologers have to learn as well, because there's a desire to be right and to shock the client and to say, look at this thing that I know happened in your life. And then that's not always something that you should be digging up. That's not something that they might want to talk about. And so I think you have to approach the consultation with, what is your client looking to get out of it? Why did they schedule that appointment? When they paid for that reading, what did they want out of that experience? And that's something that I try to ask every client, because everyone's going to have a different answer. And some people just want to know about themselves. Some people are on TikTok and are scared, which that's a whole other conversation. And, some people just have like a very specific incident or experience in mind that they want to know, what was the astrological significance of this experience? And how do we work through that and provide them with not just answers in that sense, but maybe techniques to move forward in a better way, and, provide them with, maybe not advice isn't maybe the right word, but something that they can take away from the session and apply to their life that's actually going to benefit them in some context.
This also brings me to the issue of healing and remediation, because with astrology, astrology is a tool, it's a language. It can be both means to an end and the end itself. So when I do cosmology, you mentioned about shocking people, when I do spirit of matter, I take all of the little girl that wants to, that's where I do it. And even then, sometimes I'm like, okay, I should not say this about this celebrity, and so maybe their family is in life still. But with clients, you have to, you kind of take all of your ego out when you do YouTube videos or whatever, so that when you are with your client, it's their time to shine.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not, when you're in that client space, it's, I think, important to remember that it's just not about you at all. It's about them. And I always tell them, this is your session. If you just want to talk for an hour about whatever's going on in your life, I'm here to hold that space for you. If you want me to predict your future, we can do that. If you want to just do whatever it is, if you want to cry for an hour, you can cry for an hour. It's just making it whatever is good for them. And I like that you brought up the celebrity charts as well, because I have this kind of ethical debate in my head about whether or not this is okay to do, and if it's okay to read celebrities charts, and where is the line. And this is something I think about a lot, actually. So I thought it was interesting that you brought that up.
Oh wow, that you brought, I brought this one out for like as a part of something, and then you emphasized the point that I didn't even think of, because I got to it when I did Britney's chart, but not to do her chart. I did Britney's chart as a leader, not as a singer. And that was, it's not the kind of video that I usually do on the channel. I did this with this very specific agenda, because I saw that to support her argument, basically.
Yes, of course.
But I would not do it from a yellow perspective. And a part of what I do with Spirit of Matter is really to show how we can see the contribution of a person through their chart. Yes, intimacy and sexuality and the family, they play a part, but it's not something you would not read on Wikipedia. I would not get into details I would not read on Wikipedia, even if I did have them. And so with a celebrity, you have it all in the open, but it's important for us not to be yellow pages, because it's not about yellow pages. It is not about, and I think that's the difference between trying to predict what was going on in the intimate life of someone, unless of course there is a reason to do so, like the Johnny Depp case, or people, the Me Too cases, but not to go yellow, but rather to show how astrology works in real life, because we have the concrete events of the person, and then we can make a prediction and then get to the chart. So I think that's like the way I'm doing it. But yes, I can definitely see the potential for things to go yellow with astrology.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting concept of who is it okay to read for as well, because I have this weird line in my head where I think someone like Kim Kardashian, who has put her entire life out for the public and has willingly said, watch my life, and this is everything I'm doing all the time, then you're commenting on things that she's put out there. So that feels a bit more consensual to me. But certain actors or actresses or any celebrity who is maybe just doing art, they're just performing their art, and they don't want the fame aspect of that. And that's not, where do we draw that line of, okay, maybe this isn't okay? And I think it's hard because, like you said, it's one of the best ways to show how astrology works. And we can give these really universal examples by focusing on celebrity charts. But then, I don't know where I draw that line of, okay, but is it too far? Is this non-consensual? If they saw this, would they feel uncomfortable? Would they feel like they were getting their boundaries crossed? And that's something that I'm, still, I guess, contending with. But like you said, it can be such a great tool for looking at like Britney's case or the Johnny Depp case or anything like that. I feel like is a really great use of astrology and seeing how that could play out, and if they're okay, and you have a lot of millions of people who want to know how that person is coping, but is it is it our responsibility to say, I don't know, that's where I just ninth house debate in my head.
Definitely. For me, I was offered to do Britney Spears chart for weeks, and I was thinking, okay, but I don't want to do something yellow, and I definitely don't want to do it to use her. But then it was about, I think, a week or two after she had her testimonial, and I listened to her testimonial. Something called me to listen to her testimonial, and I saw her voice, and I'm a holistic health practitioner, so I could identify the voice, that how she was so strong throughout this and so sane throughout this. I said, something here does not make sense to me. I need to see a chart. And I saw her Mercury, her moon, and her sun were unafflicted. I said, this is not the birth chart of a person who's been hospitalized in mental health. There could be timers, there could be this, there can be that. It cannot be that not Mercury, not the sun, not the moon are afflicted. It cannot be. I mean, I have all of them afflicted. And Richard Feynman had his Mercury afflicted by Saturn, and I think Saturn in the ninth house, and I think Neptune. And you can immediately see that it was Mercury in Taurus. I was like, no, something is going on here. And it was obvious to me that I want to support her voice. And that was good enough a reason for me to do that reading and use my experience as astrologer to support her claim. But it is a very unusual video that I've done. And I will probably take it off the minute she is free. But yeah, I think the question would be to ask yourself, is it an appreciation?
Yeah.
For example,
I think everyone will have a different answer as well. I think some astrologers can do it in a very careful way, and it really works. Chris Brennan's entire course is celebrity charts almost, and showing how that works. And I can't deny that was not the way that I personally learned astrology as well. So I know how powerful and impactful it is. I think it's just, an ethical thing that all astrologers have to come to terms with at some point, and just finding the answer that feels, that resonates with them. Because I think it will be different for everybody. We could probably, I guess, ponder about what placements in the chart would talk about whether or not people feel okay with that or not.
Yeah, I think it's important to see what is out there and not to talk about what is not out there.
Mhm.
And is it appreciation? Am I doing this out of appreciation? Because if I'm doing something out of appreciation, then I will do art with it. If not, then I should do it with myself, not with another. And also make sure that the things are out there. For example, when I did like a mini research about Urania, the asteroid Urania on 3 astrologers, um, I wanted to add other astrologers, and there were people that I knew a lot of their placements, but I was like, if I don't see a chart in Google out there, I cannot do it because I
Mhm.
don't know. A person can speak about their placements all and all and on and on and on and on and on, but they will not delineate outside of the context of, let's say, the form in which they speak of. I would not delineate because I don't have it, it's not out there for the wide public. So that's
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
um, so yeah. And I was kind of thinking, you were saying ninth house again, and it all comes down to the ninth and these questions of um, I guess fate and fortune and whatnot, and the philosophical stuff. So
Yeah.
especially in traditional, when people learn traditional, for me there are some techniques I don't learn in traditional because I know that I call it a divine stupidity around them. Literally.
I love that. That's why I refuse to learn the length of life technique. I'm like, I don't want to touch that.
Yeah, so and that's my question to you, like what would you advise people who are learning astrology to do? um, what would be your boundaries as to what do you want or not want to know in your field, because we have the potential to know nearly everything.
That's a great question. And something that, as well, I think I'm having an existential crisis over the concept of fate and free will every single day. Especially, I think it happened for me after I learned zodiacal releasing in such depth, because when you can break down the life into chapters of book and you can get down to the day, like I've predicted, within several days of like engagements and just like different things like that. And you start thinking, is it all just completely fated? And so then I don't know if anyone has an answer as to how to cope with that, because I think it's something that's so individual. And for me, I guess I'm just trying to adopt the stoic mindset of you learn your fate so you can accept it, and what will be will be. And I think in some ways it really takes a lot of the pressure off in some contexts, which can be really validating and affirming. And I think for me, what I really try to focus on as well with clients is the nature of cycles and how everything is a cycle and everything in our life is a cycle. So we will all have challenging periods, and those challenging periods will look differently to different people. Some people will have a really challenging period for 20 years. Some people will have an amazing period for 20 years. And within those periods, you'll have hard times and good times. And there's always going to be an end date to the pain. And there's also always going to be an end date to the really great beneficial parts that are coming to you at a given moment. And so I think it can be really freeing in some way to understand the cycles of life and the rhythm that we're all going through in a different way on different timelines at a different moments. But I don't know if I have an answer for how to cope with it, because I think I still am. And I think it's hard to cope with, honestly. But there are certain things that I don't want to know. I will never predict death. I won't even look at death. I think that's something I don't even want to learn, because I know how my brain works and I know it will just do it automatically. And I don't want to know when my parents are going to die. I don't want to know when my spouse is going to die. I think and I don't want to predict it for a client either, because if I'm wrong as well, I've just instilled so much unnecessary fear. You have no idea what the client is going to do with that information when they leave the session. And they might think they really want to know that, but they might not actually be equipped to handle that. And I don't think it's my responsibility or duty as an astrologer to tell someone when they're going to die. So that is something that I really steer away from. I think that's something I don't want to learn and wouldn't feel comfortable ever predicting for anyone. But then I don't know, then we get into rocky territory with what about divorces and what about like the nature of relationships. And so that's where I'm still kind of walking that line a little bit. And I think it depends on how the consultation goes as well with the client. And then for myself, I think at this point I've seen it all. So now I'm kind of just like, man, 43 does not look great. We'll see what happens.
The more I learn about astrology, the less I look at my chart.
Yes, yes. Me too. I think I don't focus on my transits day to day anymore. I just realized today, actually, I was like, oh, wait, didn't Mars just pass my IC? I was like, huh. And normally, Mars is my malefic, so I was like, that's something that most people would want to pay attention to. And I just fully did not realize it. I think the only thing I really pay attention to these days is my Zodiacal Releasing, because I'm trying to journal it. So then in 10 years, I can look back and hopefully have a really great bulk of research for day to day. And it's just what I did that day and how it relates, and then hopefully be able to glean some insights from that. That's really the only thing that I focus on day to day.
Wow. Yeah. Because you can run into, for example, this is you mentioned something also important, because sometimes a client will tell us, I had my mama doing that to me, and I'm Pisces rising, she's Capricorn rising, and she's ruled by Saturn, and I'm ruled by Jupiter. So for me, if I would go to an astrologer, it would be give me an empowering, and my only tool of divination is the Maryland cards, it's in Hebrew, which are just empowering messages. So I would my divination would be, what is an empowering message for the person in front of me. You can do a lot more than I expected with this, but I would not do tarot for a client, for example. I might learn it, but I would not do tarot for a client. And I told my mama, she said, I want you to tell me everything. Don't hide anything from me. So I did her a little trick. I knew how to get her. And I said, you know what? Give me the birth date of grandmama, and I will do a synastry for you. He said, no, this is too much for me. I said, you don't want to know everything. But this story is not, but the story is to tell that our clients sometimes are going to do just that. They're going to tell me everything. Don't hide anything from me. Okay, you're going to die.
Yes, I had a similar experience with my mom as well. She wanted to know when her parents were going to die. And I told her I refuse. I was like, I'm not looking at that. And several days later, she comes back to me and says, thank you so much for not telling me, because I actually don't think I would have been able to handle that information. And so I think it's just like what you said. Sometimes we think we want to know, but in reality, with hindsight, we probably didn't want to know. And so you could really be doing a client a favor by not telling them certain things as well. And that's where we get into, if astrology is really a form of divination, what will need to be said will come up in the consultation, and we won't have to, force anything. If it doesn't feel right to say it, you probably shouldn't.
Right. I mean, and then that brings, you talked about, you just briefly said, oh, ninth house things, we incarnated here. And I'm like, I cannot not touch about it. I mean, let's philosophical thing. Let's talk about astrology, and because I think if this is all planetary changes in relations between states, and cycles. Mm-hmm. So it makes a lot of sense that when there is something out there that is not just the body, that it recycles as well.
Yeah.
And then you have like multiple lives that afflict or benefit your life. That touches, I think, on a lot of very sensitive topics for people. Like even if I would speak about something fun, like, oh, I had an energetic, intimate encounter, and this is what happened. People will be, you what? No, you fantasize. No, you were with yourself. Because that road, it is so simple. It's something so simple, but it touches on that road of life, death, what's beyond, what's this, that ninth house things that could cause a person to completely crash down. And how do we navigate that placement for both for ourselves and for our clients that come to get a fun reading, and they don't think about it all the way. They're like, when will I have a relationship? But you're a ninth house person, so especially with you, it can happen also. That the person kind of gets to to understand which you predicted that I will have a window for opportunity in my relationships, blah, 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 and then kind of think, especially if they're a ninth house person, that usually the type of people that come to you and they kind of, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think especially with those relationship questions as well, it gets tricky because maybe it's not for another 20 years. Most people don't want to hear that. And so I think it's trying to also explain the cycles to people is what I try to do, and say, frame it in a way that feels comfortable to them, and say, hey, you could have a lot of really beautiful, significant relationships, but I think you might have your best relationships or your most important ones later in life. And the reason why I think that's beautiful is, and then I'll kind of like talk to them about that and say, imagine you're retired and you're done working, you've put in all of your labor, and now you get to sit back and relax with your soulmate, and you just get to live life with no obligations to other people, and you really get to enjoy that moment with that person at that time. That might feel a lot more significant to you than the relationship that you have when you're 30 to 35. And that doesn't mean that that relationship when you're 30 to 35 isn't going to be really impactful and significant, but it might not be the one that you think about when you're on your deathbed. And that's kind of how I try to frame it in ways where it feels like it's still hopeful. And maybe that's just my very dignified Jupiter. I will always look for the silver lining, and I will always try to spin it in a positive light. Obviously, some scenarios you just really can't do that. And that's, the challenge that is life, and of trying to explain those difficult situations to people. But yeah, I think it's just in trying to make them understand. And I guess that's also a very ninth house thing to say, is just try to make them understand the cycles of life. And I think that is so powerful when they walk away from a reading saying, you know what, I feel like it affirmed something for me. Or someone said, it helps with the existential dread. And I was like, that is such a nice thing to say after a reading, And so I think if you can just help people, some people just want to know that they're ever going to have an important relationship because they haven't had one up until that point. So if you can say, yeah, you will, it just might not be for a little bit, but you're going to experience that. That's really affirming to a lot of people. So sometimes it's just the if it will happen, not the when.
Wow, that usually creates a lot of, unless you don't see any signification for relationship in the chart, and then you're like, okay, what do I do now? But usually you do. I mean, usually you do see something. You might not want to look at how it looks like. I would definitely not put the person through seeing my chart in terms of relationships. Like I would pity the astrologer, but I think about the signs of the stars. You're a ninth house person, so I think with you. A part of what this is it's the signs of the stars, and the signs of the stars is both to observe the objects in the heavens, and to predict the movements and the flow, and to predict the weather, and to predict the effect, and to predict the temperatures, and to predict what's going to happen, and to understand, and to know, 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 and to delve deeper into the mystery. And the more I learn about astrology, the more I see that this is actually the science of cultivating that sense of mist around things, because in essence a lot of it is about learning to know what you don't want to know.
Yeah,
we run into that a lot. For example, I come from the healing, I come from a couple of years in the medical field, and not medical conventional field, but holistic field. And still, the life coaching, the healing, the whatnot, it's all about not knowing. And it's all about believing. It's honing, very Jupiterian, it's honing on what you can change, what you can affect, what you can do. And not, you say, I'm not God. There are the doctors who would say, to a person, oh, you have so and so years to live, which is, I think they are where some astrologers are at. But usually in medicine, you cultivate that not knowingness.
Yeah.
That helps the person. And with astrology, we kind of walk on a very fine line between knowing and not knowing. Because if I take a look at Feynman, which is one of I seriously consider my spirit guide, at the edge of his life, he would say, what the meaning of all of it doesn't matter. The sense of discovery is the sense of discovery. But then he also, he was also part of the Manhattan Project. We can't ignore that. Which would back then was looked at in a very positive way, even when the A bombs dropped, but later, right? And with astrology, it's like, wait, when I think about the sense of discovery, I really need to think of how do I point the arrow? Because it's not going to be the sense of discovery of, what hardships is this person or fortunes is this person is going to have. It's going to be a sense of discovery around something bigger than us.
Yeah, I think, and here we go back to the ninth house again, but I think that's the journey through the ninth house, is coming to terms with where your place is and walking that line of, is there something bigger than us? And, I was writing something on this earlier today about how even the staunchest atheists and even the people who believe there is absolutely nothing more to life, they've still thought about it quite a bit, and they've had their own ninth house journey of some kind. And I think that is where we see how it's something that we can't ignore. Those questions are going to plague everybody at some point. What is the purpose of life? What is my place here? What happens after we die? And regardless of if you believe in the universe and you believe in spirit guides and all of that stuff, or if you don't at all and you're on the very other end of that spectrum, I think you're still taking a journey through the ninth house, and you're still defining your place in this world, whether you believe you're just cells and you're going to rot in the ground, or if you believe that you're a spirit that's going to separate. And so I think that's really interesting as well, that we all contend with this at some point, whether we want to and whether it becomes a major part of our life and how we seek that greater meaning. I think that's the story that the ninth house tells.
It's so interesting because, the ninth house for, traditional, yes, it's the house of God. For the Vedic, and I use the word Vedic because of Ayurveda, I still did not get into the discussion of why is it Indian and not Vedic, so I'm not educated about it, so I use the term that I think is logical as according to the data that I have. But the Vedics, they saw the 9th and the 12th, of course, as Jupiterian houses. They did assign signs to houses with their logic that was very, that was valid. And they see Jupiter as both the guru and for them it's for women. I think I would expand it on the Jupiterian essence of our spouse, be it whomever, and the concept beneath that is that the women would not marry anyone who was not compatible with them. To be compatible to yin signs, to intuition, to the knowledge that women had, again, people with wombs would probably be a better, or people who are yin signs oriented would probably better today to describe this. But to be compatible, you have to be like a philosopher, a researcher, a guru, a sage. And only then you could be compatible with this woman. Then you would become the bearer of children. So it would be the guru, it would be the husband, it would be the bringer of children. It would also mean children. And so when they open up the 9th house, they do an Avamsha, which is the D9. They open up the 9th house and they make a whole chart out of it. And that is both the chart of a person after 35, 36 years of age, what we would call after Saturn maturation, and the chart where they would look at when they decide, because in India still today a lot of marriages are arranged. And how do they do that? They go to an astrologer and they would look at an Avamsha and they would see if the people are compatible in terms of their worldview. So this is so important that we don't get the significations in modern age. And I would think, why does God play such a huge role in our lives, even if we're not believers?
Yeah, I think it's because we're trying to derive meaning. We're trying to find answers. And I think we all have those questions. And whether it's God or the universe or whatever, you know, people are comfortable with as well. Because I think in today's society, when you say God, there's this very, at least in like Christian traditions, it's the man in the sky and like, God, you know, like, I mean, sorry if that's what people believe, I fully respect that. But to me, it seems kind of an outdated way to look at things. Something that should at least be up for review at some point, in my opinion. But I think that it plays such a big role in our lives because we want to know more. We can't make sense of why am I here, and especially in a capitalistic society, why am I forced to work 8, 9, 10 hours a day, come home, make dinner, see the kids, go to bed, wake up, do it all over again. And I think people need and want so much more than that. And we're just not taught that that's kind of available to us in a capitalistic society. It's not important because it doesn't make money. You know, we're not making money when we're thinking about how or what the purpose of life is. So like philosophy isn't really, we don't have a lot of modern day philosophers as a career anymore like we used to in, you know, like the Hellenistic era and everything. And I think we've taken that as something that's really valuable, and sitting around, and to me obviously as a ninth house person, talking about ideas is so interesting. And I think that is valuable, and that's how we come to find these answers. But it doesn't make money, it's not productive in the eyes of, you know, capitalist society. So I think now people place so much of an emphasis on God or the universe or spirituality or religion because they need more than what they're being sold. And that's how they find it. I think that's how they can make meaning out of their place in the world and what happens after they die.
Yeah, because if we talked about remediation, we began to speak about remediation, and a part of the remediation for people who are not, you know, going to dedicate 1-2 decades to learn, you know, astrological remediation like magic and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Which is not only difficult, but I don't know enough about that, but I would think not every chart is potent for that. Like you, as an astrologer, you need to have a certain chart that you can hone into the certain talismans that you would do because you put your own energy there. So I think it's not accessible for everyone in the way that we would like it to be. But what's accessible is our faith and our beliefs and our worldview. Also in terms, you know, I reached it through medicine, because in medicine, what you believe in, it plays a role in your body. There are beliefs that feel different in your body. This is a part of how channeling science came to life, because I was like looking for, you know, all these, you know, Leonardo da Vinci, the person who invented algebra, even Einstein talked about imagination, and I was like, they were doing something that we're not doing today in academia. I want to know what it's like. And kind of like the first channeling that I got was that the scientific endeavor, they spoke in a language that I could understand. It's like the Tower of Babel. And when they say Tower of Babel, for me as a person who's been sciencey all along, I knew what it is, but it was not something that I would use. I say, this is not my words. Oh my gosh, I'm speaking with something. And they said that scientific endeavor is like a Tower of Babel, where every paradigm or every, you know, worldview, every, you call it epistemology, it's like, how do we know that we know? Every Mercury, you know, is like a variation on the canon of truth.
Yeah.
And so those different variations, they would feel different in the body of a person, and the person has to identify what beliefs are correct for now for the well-being, which is a part of what I do as a holistic practitioner. And so that plays out. And also for in remediation of relationships, they would say, hone in on your Jupiter, develop yourself spiritually, cultivate joy. Cultivate joy. And you can see how it plays practically in people's life. If a person is in a sense of contentment, they are less liable to be abused. And they are more able to, more resilient to break up or to loss.
Yeah. You said something that reminded me of something I saw the other day. I think it was Jake Green, I think on Twitter, was talking about how people with their lot of spirit in Mars ruled signs are the people who tend to be involved in astro magic and a lot of remediation, because they want to do something with the astrology. They want to put it into being in some way. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And I like what you said about how different people's charts are going to either enable them to be someone who does remediation or doesn't. And it's something I've personally been thinking about a lot with my very afflicted Mercury. I should probably look into some Mercury remediation, but I haven't done it. And I wonder if it's because my chart is just not meant for that. And I think that, like you said, people are going to be drawn to different things. And the one thing you said about having like a partner who supports your worldview and stuff, I think is very interesting as well, because I think it can work in ways that when you don't share the same beliefs at all, I think it can really work. But it does take very open-minded people to be able to do that. And so then you have to have that open-minded quality regardless of whether your beliefs are the same. And I think that's something that's really was interesting that you touched on.
Yeah, I think, how do the beliefs, for example, for me, I think, how do the beliefs of my clients serve them? Before I try to touch them or to change them or to think that I know better, I try to look at the beauty of what is.
Yeah.
And sometimes that alone allows for a space for things to evolve. If we understand what does it help us with. And I'm curious about, when people come to you, of course, you probably have not only astrology to offer them, right? You said, like, from what you said about being able to hold a space, I can see that you have more tools to deal. And I think it's something that astrologers need to know, that this space becomes a space of consultation. And that means that more tools are going to get into the praxis. If you're doing astrology not just for research, but also for consultations, then people get something. The very reading of the chart is in itself remediating, because it's validating. It can give hope. It can give grounding. And I think Stoicism is very grounding. And then is there the point where you would have tools to interfere? For example, not magical tools, but what, alchemy tools maybe?
I don't know about what other tools necessarily. I think I am a very spiritual person, and I think most people know that, especially on like my YouTube channel and everything. I talk about that quite a bit, and I'm very open with my spirituality. And so I think being able to offer a different perspective is really critical and important. And I think I also I think we all kind of operate from this place where we believe that we only have our five senses because that's what we're taught. And I think there is that sixth sense, and maybe more, where we have that intuition, we have that connection. You were talking about, connecting with energy and spirits and being able to have those experiences that some people might write off and be like, this person they've lost their mind. But you know how real it is to you because you've experienced it. And I think when you begin to have those experiences, you turn that on and you start tuning into it a lot more. And so I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant with your question, but I think that's something that I've really tried to develop and lean into that sixth sense and know that even if it's not in the chart, there might be something that comes to me during the session. There might be an image in my head, and that's not there for no reason. I'm someone who really doesn't believe in coincidences. I think it's synchronistic, and I think there are reasons behind everything. So I try to also take that into consideration when I'm in a consultation space. But if I'm going to offer that information to the client, I also tell them, I'm not seeing this in the chart, but this is really coming up for me, or I'm getting goosebumps right now, which usually, like when I feel them in my cheeks, it's, to me at least, a very definitive yes from spirit. And so I have those certain things that I kind of also take into consideration, but I always share with the client that it maybe isn't in the chart itself, but it is still coming up for me. And so to maybe take that into consideration, but then they're going to obviously have their own beliefs on whether or not that's valid or not. I just need to grab my computer charger really quickly. I am so sorry.
That's okay. I'm gonna grab me water.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I meant to do that before and I completely forgot.
It happens. At least it didn't turn off, so that's working for us.
Yes, I've been watching it tick down, just getting more and more anxious. Okay, there we go. All good.
And you talked about spirit. It's like I had like 5 or 6 things that came up, then I'll just go by them. The first was not the first, but it was I noticed two things. One, when I give a reading, which can also put me in awkward situations in social, like in the community, because when I delineate, I like enter an altered state. I forget who am I speaking with. I am, in connection, but it's something. There's a wave that's almost. I don't think about who am I speaking with. What am I saying? What is? I would sometimes remember to consider things, but it's almost like I get guided to look this way, look in
channeling
here. Yeah, and I'm like, why am I guided? And then I begin to delineate that. So it can put me in awkward situations where I think it was on the very Jade post where I started to delineate my spirit lot, and I was like, shh, I just wrote like 2-3 comments on my own chart on someone's Twitter. Like, they don't care. Why did I do that?
So you could remember, probably.
What?
So you could remember, probably. I'm sure it was Spirit's way of trying to get your attention.
It was very meaningful to me. It was very meaningful to me. And also, I always looked at magic as something that's Saturnian, because it's a very demanding art. It's something that you dedicate life to. It's very unforgiving. But then I thought about Mars, and I thought about the knife. And I was like, oh my God, the knife is unforgiving too. So you would need this sort of Marsy spirit together with the Saturnian kind of, like this Mars Saturn. You have to master to do that. But that one thing of spirit guiding us to look at different placements. So that I found really interesting. Like, I wanted to ask if you experienced that.
Yeah, I think as much as I would like for it to happen in every reading, it doesn't. But it does very obviously happen to me in other readings, and sometimes it depends on the medium. I feel like sometimes actually when I give readings over message or text, which is sometimes what clients prefer, I almost feel like that's when I really channel, because I'm just in the conversation, just typing and like listening and to what they're saying and reading back the chart. And that's generally when I feel like I channel the most. And I don't know if it's because there isn't the interruption in speech where we're kind of going back and forth, but I'm almost just put on this place where I can just like wind and go and go and go. And I usually tell them before I do those readings, interrupt me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I keep talking so we can make the most of your time, since typing out the messages obviously takes a lot longer than verbalizing them. And so I do feel like I get drawn to certain things in the chart, and it just comes up at different times. And I genuinely wish it happened in every session, because when it does, I feel like I walk away from those ones being like, wow, that hit, that was really magical, or that was really special.
Yeah, it's like an altered state. When I was getting into astrology for a while, I was like playing around. And I was playing around in the sense I thought I went out of academia because I wanted to learn with my body as well. So I'm like, what am I going to study now? Another science that's only cognitive. And when I began to delineate, I was like, something's going on here.
Yeah, and I think we can see that too. I don't know about you, but how exhausted you are after a reading.
I'm not.
No,
I'm actually charged. Okay.
Really, this is so interesting.
Important. This is important because the way for me to get charged is basically what it is important, because what we're supposed to do, I've learned it as holistic practitioner. I don't give out my energy. I let energy come through me, and then this energy tells me what to look, and I do that, and then I get charged. It's like I get healed. I do need to rest. I do need to absorb, but I need to rest. Like, I've been going through healing, so I need to drink water. This is also when I work with clients. It's important to identify what charges us, because you're supposed to actually be charged.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think when I do maybe one reading, I think I feel really charged. But when I do two or more is when in the same day is when I start feeling really drained. And I do agree, it's probably normally when I'm not cleansing as much, like energetic cleansing and stuff, that takes more of a toll. So that's actually a really good point. Something really interesting to bring up, that I think some people, sometimes I feel like it is really energetically taxing, and maybe that is because I'm giving my energy away too much.
Well, that's another issue, because I know a lot of astrologers sometimes won't even do more than one reading a day.
Yeah, I think it can be really exhausting depending on the person and how much you put into it as well, how much prep work you do, what your process is like before and after. You know, some people have a very ritualistic way of approaching an astrology consultation. Like I definitely have certain things I do before and after every consult. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, especially from the client chair, how much kind of preparation of the energetic space goes into it for certain astrologers. And so yeah, I think sometimes to me it's very obvious when their energy is almost like still lingering in my space. And I did have one very weird situation where I was doing a consultation and my dog walked up to, I have a bit of an altar there, and just started barking. And she doesn't ever bark, has never barked before.
Wow.
And I just could feel something was, present. And after that reading, I was like, I need to cleanse this entire space to make sure their energy isn't lingering as well. So I think it's having care about your own energy and making sure that you're not also holding on to the clients after the session.
Yeah, there is also, it's a lot of spirit going into this. And it's also a lot of, on the more mundane level, it's a lot of psychology, because what spirit clings to is something in our aura, is something in our energy, and that we can tackle it at an energetic level, but we will tackle it also at a psychological level, whether we like it or not. So there's a lot of healing. There's a lot in astrology. You almost don't have to say know thyself, because everybody who begins to study astrology are like, what's it like in my chart? And then they get to the more advanced technique, and they're like, okay, let's look at another chart. Then we come to this threshold of where it's like it's a lot of know thyself. And for healers, everybody says you need to heal yourself. You constantly need to be in supervision and in healing. You constantly need to nourish yourself. You constantly need to cleanse the energy. And I think this discourse is needed also in the astrological community, because people, for example, just like the example you said, oh, I'm usually drained after a reading. And I'm like, wait, no, you're supposed to be charged. And I'm like, oh, wait, after the first reading, I am charged, but later I'm beginning to be drained. So it's a lot of what we can expect and what we can't expect as in praxis to be given to us, because yes, there's a lot of energy that goes into this cleansing of the space. How do we price ourselves? Because that would sometimes mean that I would see a client for an hour and a half, and that would be a day for me, because I would go with their chart a couple of days before, and I would let things sink in, and then I would channel for them. And the things that I would channel for them, it's not just for them, it's also for me. So from psychology, people know, like a therapist knows, to look into themselves, what the images that arise, how is it relating to them, how is it relating to the patient, what to tell, what not to tell. For an astrologer, we don't get this training so much. Also, what we look and what we see. You said another thing, and I would like to ask you also about that, because you said you got a client that believed you by saying something because you are objective. And this is a very beautiful experience for a client. That being said, from a professional point of view, when I do, for example, spirit of matter, I take a look at the chart of the person, and then I take a look at the synastry and composite I have with the person. This is not just because I'm curious, and it's not just to show off my ego or it's not the narcissistic thingy. It's to show where can I be biased. Does his Neptune afflict my Mercury? Does it bring Neptune to one of the houses that could make me biased about this person? I've had readings such as that, where I can say, see, this is why I look at that. And I think we also need to be aware of that when we give a reading, because there is always a bias as to how we would see a signification.
Yeah, absolutely. From our own lived experience, from the clients we've seen previously who have had similar placements, I think that's how a lot of astrologers begin to develop their own kind of toolbox of, cookbook definitions of what a placement means or how it plays out. And so those will inform your future consultations and your future delineations. And I think that's really an interesting practice to look at the synastry, actually. I really like that between the two charts. I haven't done that before, but that is something that I think I might take away from this. And I also really want you to read my chart now that we've had this conversation. You might be having me as a client in the future. I'm so interested in your method. But yeah, I think being aware of our own biases is always important in any field, where we're impacting people's lives. Because I think, as we kind of touched on earlier, you don't know how the client is going to feel when they leave. And so coming into that from the most ethical or moral high point that you can, to provide them with, the least amount of bias, and try to at least be as objective as possible, is important. But I think we're always going to have that bias. And that's that's human nature. We all have different lived experiences and different privileges and different, languages and cultures and so many different things that inform the way that we experience life and the way that we experience astrology and consultations and client settings and everything of that nature. So I think, yeah, just trying to be as objective as possible, but also understanding that that's probably not entirely possible. But I like that you use the charts, because then it kind of is possible. So you've really hacked the system there. I love that.
You can look at the data, it's not forever, because there is always a bias about how we see things. And also, when Neptune comes in, it addicts in such a way, gives you such a divine sense, that the very sense of the divine feelings that you have is enough to get you going there, even though you know that it is just I think about Neptune as incarnation. Oh my god. I think about Neptune.
That is so interesting.
Because it's so fun to speak with you, because with you I can do that, because you're a ninth house person.
This is why those ninth house friendships. I'm like, let's talk about how Neptune represents incarnation. I want to talk about the weather.
Because you think about Neptune being the ruler of Pisces, and if we would go to the Vedas, then yes, that would mean 12th house. But even if we don't go to the Vedas, Pisces comes before Aries, and Pisces is the void. And the way a soul incarnates into the world, I'm gonna be a bit, I have Scorpio in the ninth, so bear with me for being, Scorpionic in my humor.
Oh, I love Scorpios. Go for it.
So a soul incarnates into this world, and it sees the red light, but there's such a beautiful feeling about it that they're just gonna go for it anyway, and then they go to Aries and they come into the world. And I think that's what Neptune gives us, that experience in this life. We incarnate into some time space that is real and not real, because when we leave this life again, we are facing with the unrealness of the human experience in the most potent and beautiful way. People who had near-death experiences that were full, and that's a whole lot, conversation. They actually, even we had to talk about Neptune throughout the signs, and kind of Neptune in Pisces is like psychedelics.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Part of what psychedelics do to heal people with PTSD is basically to give them an experience that simulates or is part of the experience of a near-death experience, and then they heal from these other worlds.
Yeah.
So that is important, because when we come out of Neptune, I'm currently under a Neptune transit on my ascendant. There ain't a bias.
Oof, yeah.
I'm channeling my ascendant, and I'm doing Spirit of Matter. So, but when we come out, it's usually disillusionment. And yet there was something in that space of that illusion that taught us something.
Yeah, I think we can always learn from the lack of clarity that Neptune kind of presents in a way. And the fuzziness or the haziness that Neptune kind of brings to the table, we might be able to focus in on that in a way that we couldn't if Neptune wasn't there or Neptune wasn't present. And I think it does allow us to be more in tune and more spiritual and to explore those fields that aren't necessarily visible and tangible and, touchable as well. And to have that kind of, I don't know if it's, I would say liminal space, but to have that place where we can access other experiences, either through psychedelics or, through spiritual, different, Reiki or any type of, holistic healing as well. I think that can be a really interesting place where Neptune comes out and where we can experience that kind of different energetic space than what we are taught to perceive everything as. But I have Neptune in the 8th, so there's conjunct Uranus. So there was my little Neptune thing.
Oh, Neptune conjunct Uranus. Oh my.
Yeah, and Cap in the 8th.
It's like, I think of Neptune as what we don't know that we don't know. And Uranus is like that yin rebel, yin because it's chaotic. And I'm like, oh, that's a real party up in the 8th.
Oh yeah, it's those random flashes of haziness almost that bring clarity later on, I think, is kind of how I interpret that placement for myself. It's like things will happen or I'll have a epiphany, for lack of a better word, and then maybe have a lot of confusion surrounding whatever comes up, but then down the line it all starts to make sense and I can kind of see the puzzle pieces once the fog has cleared.
Yeah, and I also think about your Pluto. You said your Pluto is in 0 degree Sag?
Yeah, I'm part of that weird generation, where it was in Scorpio, it went into Sag and then went and retrograded back into Scorpio. So I'm in that in between space where it went into Sag, and then it's also conjunct my descendant by 3 degrees. So it's a pretty intense Pluto for me.
For me, it's interesting because for me, it's 0 degree Scorpio.
No, oh my goodness. We both got that
But
0
retrograde.
degree.
For me, it's the retrograde. So yeah, I was like, oh, because it's like, oh, we both have something interesting in the experience that we're like, I'm a 0 degree Scorpio, and it acts funny because it's like it's a Scorpio, but it's not. I know people would say it's a Scorpio, come on, but it's kind of juvenile and unevolved Scorpio Pluto.
Yeah.
I was wondering about, when you have an intense Pluto, so you probably feel that. What would your Pluto experience be like?
Yeah, that's so funny. I've been thinking about this so much lately that we're bringing this up. This is something that I've thought it like deeply about the last few weeks, and
Wow.
how Pluto being conjunct my descendant has kind of brought up a lot of struggles with the people that I come into contact with, and how I and I want to say this as delicately as possible for everybody listening, but I think that I do tend to attract people who are very depressed, who have been suicidal at some point in time, who've experienced really, really traumatic experiences. And I don't know why I just had this realization. That's that Neptune conjunct Uranus in the 8th, just looking at my chart for so long and then never piecing this together, and then having this moment where I realized that's why I attract these types of people. And that can be a really challenging placement, I think, to have. And my experience with Pluto is more through the people that I come into contact with, just because it's such a tight conjunction with my descendant, I think. And so I experience Pluto through everybody that I meet, I think. And that's been a very interesting way to experience Pluto. And it's, it's in opposition to my ascendant. So we've got that going on too. So it's a lot. Pluto's a lot for me. But coming from Hellenistic, I tended to really focus on the traditional planets. So I almost wasn't giving much credence to Pluto. And now I'm realizing, maybe we need to look a little bit more into this Pluto placement and how this is playing out, because it's clearly having a major effect on the people in my life and the people that I'm either subconsciously or unconsciously seeking out and attracting.
Yeah, definitely. The outers for my chart, I have all the 3 outers in contact with the 3 inners. So that would be Uranus in conjuncting my moon, and Uranus in the 10th, moon in the 5th, and then would be Pluto opposition in my Venus and my Mercury. So my Venus in the 3rd, Mercury in the 2nd, and Pluto in the 9th. And then Neptune in the 11th up there, opposition in Juno, and it's kind of conjuncting the MC. So it's like, I really get, like, to me, any astrologer that would tell me, oh, I don't look at the other planets, I'm like, are you what?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I don't use them for rulerships, but I am definitely starting to integrate them back into my practice after focusing on just, Chris's course doesn't cover any of the outers. And so now I'm starting to integrate them back in and seeing how those play out and how loud they are a lot of the time. And they're not something that you can ignore in my experience. You can still read a chart without them and get very rich delineations, but they add something, and I've been experimenting as well with learning a bit more about the asteroids and how those add another layer. And that's why astrology is so interesting, is you can go and go and go, and you're never going to learn it all. And it's all just going to add layer on top of layer on top of layer, which is what is so intriguing to me about astrology, as well as I know that in 20 years, 30 years time, I'll still be learning new things. You become an eternal student of the subject. And that's what's exciting to me about astrology.
What I like about astrology, and as you were speaking, I was thinking again of that donut-shaped universe and Uranus in Taurus. It adds a level of richness to the human experience. Because the way that things translate between the changes in the relations between states of the planets and the changes in the relations between states in our entire, human and natural existence is almost like a comedy, sometimes a tragedy at times. With that Venus-Mars conjunction in Leo in the T-square. And on the very day that all of the astro community had, we were literally will look like a Pornhub community. All the posts of it skipped none of us, more significations, and then I thought, because when I listened to the July cast, and I was like, I don't like Venus there. I don't like Venus there. It's not going, it literally wrote, it's not going to be wet for long. And I thought, okay, I'm just beginning to do forecasts. I'm just growing and learning. And okay, I changed my mind. And the next day, a friend of mine was like, did you hear about the fires in California? I'm like, the what? So it kind of felt like we were a couple of, cheeky children, like running and then opening the door, and it was like a natural disaster outside.
Yep. And it's so many different areas as well. Like, it's not just in California, but all over the world. We're having so many natural disasters right now. And you've got that. You have Saturn and Mars and Venus and Uranus all kind of battling it out. There's going to be some very intense, things you can't ignore happening in the, mundane world, not mundane, but you see what I'm saying. And so, yeah, those fires were pretty accurate delineation. And now we have all these floods all over Europe right now. And, you can't help but think Jupiter in Pisces, retrograde, 0 degrees. And here's all of Europe flooding. And yeah, it's so literal. It's so literal.
Yes, it is so literal. And with the fires in California, it was not so funny. But sometimes it can get, the donut-shaped universe. That was like I can't come off it.
Yeah, it can be really entertaining in a way. And even on some level, it makes the bad stuff and the challenging things. It's like you said, it's a tragic comedy, because it's coming, and you can see, we know that Jupiter going back into Aquarius, we know we're going to have restrictions on COVID again. Every astrologer has been saying this for months now. And then what happens? It's almost comical when it happens, but it's such a tragedy in the grand scheme of what's going on and how many people are losing their lives. And if people would listen to the validity of astrology, we could have maybe avoided some of that. But then when it happens, you can't help but be like, we knew, we said, and here it is. I think I had written in my July horoscopes as well about how we're going to see the return of mask mandates and, stuff. One said Jupiter goes back into Aquarius. And then maybe 2 days later, 3 days later, I see something from the French government talking about how by the end of July, we're expecting a fourth wave. And you just have to throw up your hands and say, I don't want to be right anymore. Like I'm kind of, I wish I wasn't right. It's almost, one of those moments where it's surreal.
Yeah, yeah. And I think about this as, for me, when I started to do astrology, I had a phase where I was undergoing so many havoc in my, I don't know if I should call it even relationships, but then I was looking at my chart, and then I literally sat next to my best friend. I went through every Pluto year, and every one of them made a hard aspect to my inner planets. And I was like, okay, I'm letting go of that being a practical tool that can help me to resolve my life, but astrology is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me back to the ninth, because in those phases where we can predict, a disaster, we can look at the disaster and say, oh my gosh, this is a disaster, this is the planets, this is fate. Or we can look and say, how amazing is that connection between the above and below?
Yes. And to know that it will end, to know that, once that transit is over, there will be hope again. There will be rejoicing, once we have Jupiter back in Pisces, I think it'll be a lot happier again. People are going to feel a lot more optimistic, after towards the end of the year. And so it's nice to know that too. And again, I guess it all goes back to cycles as well, and those ninth house kind of themes of, the destruction is coming, I say, as Pluto is about to enter Aquarius and cross my stellium.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's going to rock my whole entire world, but all you can kind of do is sit back and watch and just be like, wow, this is incredible. How, as you say, as above, so below, and watch it all kind of play out just almost a little too perfectly.
Well, I have my very best friend has a stellium in Capricorn.
Oh, I only say that because those Pluto transits must have been, I have, my Uranus and Neptune there. So that's been, and in the final degrees too. So now that Pluto's retrograding back to all of those, that's been really nice. So I can understand how that struggle must have been very obvious for her as well.
But yes, and I can say that, and I'm saying that not to put you down, but actually to say that, from outside the tunnel, it looks like this is a very dark place. From inside the tunnel, you do see the light.
Yeah. And I think that's what the power of astrology is being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel and being able to come out the other side of it and know that there's more beyond this, and there's more above, and there's more below, and how amazing it is that we get to tap into that and access that and tell clients about that as well, and speak that into existence and share that with people and show them that magic. Because I think it's something that so many people don't recognize in their lifetimes, and to me it feels like such a gift to be able to give that to people.
Right. Yes. I think about, our conversation, and I'm like, the unique voice that you bring to this discourse is really that voice of, the astrologer of the ninth house. Really, that voice of bringing, there's this seeing the world from a different point of view.
Yeah.
That's really like,
I hope to bring that. So thank you. That's such a compliment.
And this is another thing that's important for our viewers and astrologers who are beginners, of like, that's another thing, a person can add to the astrology world, to the client, to see the world from another point of view. And this is another beautiful aspect of astrology in itself, because it allows us to do that. So yes, sometimes that point of view means that we can predict stuff that we may not want to see, but it also exposes us to a lot of magic.
Yeah.
Just because we know how it works.
Yes.
That we know how it works makes it so much more magical than even not to know.
It's like having the code to the matrix a little bit, you can kind of peek behind the door, and that makes it such a magical experience, even if it is a very challenging situation that you're up against or whatever it is that you're going through. So I completely agree.
yeah, it's this place of growth. If I can say how am I biased in my presentation of you, then of course I have Pluto, Saturn, and Mars in the ninth in Scorpio, all retro, all aspect in my inner planets. Pluto with Mercury and Venus, uh, Saturn also Venus and the Sun, Mars the Sun. So they all go back to that. The ruler Jupiter is in the 11th, again, a public house. I got Uranus in Sag, 10th house, ruling. I do use rulership. It does rule. I don't think anybody could understand me very good without understanding that the ruler of my 12th house, taboo, the things we don't know, the shame that we don't talk about, is in my 10th, a public house. I don't think anybody could understand me and what I do. Saturn is not enough, it's in the ninth, but without using that modern ruler. So I'm very much oriented towards learning and growth, and all of my relationships are around growth, and it's all about the learning experience for me. So to me, like, I'm probably like the typecast of your clients.
Yeah.
To learn more about the world. Um, so yeah, on that note, where can your prospective clients find you, and what are your paid services that you offer right now?
Yeah, they can find me at my website, which is just www.kiraryberg.com. So just my name. And I do have my YouTube channel. It's not really astrology content, but if you're interested in what I'm putting out there, you can find me there. I'm on Twitter, but I don't tweet, astrology tweets for the masses. It's just more about my personal experience with astrology. And that's just at Kira Astrology. So one word. But that's pretty much it. And then the services I offer are mainly natal chart readings right now. I have different lengths of time depending on what clients are looking for. So I have a 30-minute, hour, and an hour and a half option. And then I also do offer written reports for people who maybe aren't as comfortable in a conversational setting. But I do always say that it's the client space where in those consultations where the magic really happens. So I much prefer giving live consultations rather than doing the written reports, but it's definitely an option for people who are looking for that. And then I do have a mini reading as well if people just want to know about a certain placement in their chart or have like one question that they're looking for an answer to. That's also available. So that's kind of what I offer right now, but I'm expanding. So keep checking and there will be more to come in the near future.
Amazing. And just one question for the clients who are thinking about it. How would one know to choose between, half an hour, an hour and a half?
Yeah. I think,
Before.
well, one, it depends on how interested you are in the subject matter. I think if it's your first time getting a reading, I would go for an hour and just, get your toes wet, see how it goes. 30 minutes is really so short. And that's kind of what I say for if you're a returning client, we've already kind of really gone into your chart and you just want an update, maybe on transits, the 30 minutes a great kind of follow-up option. And then if you know that you're someone who's really chatty and you have a lot of questions and you're a ninth house person, maybe go for the hour and a half. But you have to be someone who's willing to have that give and take in a consultation setting, because I can't talk at you for an hour and a half. You're not going to get anything from that. I'm not going to get anything from that. So having a kind of self-awareness of also how communicative you are, I think is really important in determining what kind of length of consultation you want. But I think the hour is the sweet spot for most people.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I was thinking, ninth house person. So you probably a lot of ninth house people would be turning to you. So choose the 1 hour and a half, and you won't regret it.
Yeah. If you really want to dive in and you really have a lot of questions and you want to talk about astrology in general as well, I think the hour and a half is such a fun time to really do such a deep dive in ways that you just cannot possibly do with the 30-minute. We're barely going to touch your sun, moon, and rising in that kind of time length. So it just depends on how much you want to know, and what, of course, your financial capabilities are as well.
And you said, talk about astrology in general. I'm thinking, do you have any plans to bring to teach soon about astrology?
I wouldn't say soon, but I think it's definitely something that I've thought about a lot as far as like the longevity of my career and where I would like to go. I would love to teach someday. I think it's really a space that is almost like the client setting. It's very special. And I do, I have like an astrology TikTok where I try to, communicate with those Gen Zers and set them straight because there's just so much content out there that is terrifying to me as someone who knows astrology. And there's some misinformation. I try to be the voice of reason on TikTok a little bit, and which is a very hard thing to do.
I don't know. It strikes me that there is astrology on TikTok. In my journey, I've learned people who casually say stuff like, the first time I was exposed to an astrology book, like as a child at 12, and I'm like, what? Or when I was 18, I knew that that's going to be the transit, and I'm like, you knew what?
That is always so wild to me. I was like, what a gift to know it that young, but I personally cannot imagine. But now we do have this really kind of a resource. And so I think with that comes a lot of pros and cons. That'll be a whole other discussion, but that would take a long time. But yeah, I think I try to be at least a little bit of the voice of reason on there, but I would like, and so I did do more teaching style content on there. It's very short form, which is now why I remember why I brought that up. So if you wanted to know like little basics about, I go into perfections or what a stellium is and kind of teaching very basic concepts on there. But I think somewhere way down the line, I'd like to teach when I've got a lot more knowledge under my belt.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, I'd definitely be interested to see more from you. And it's so good to have ninth house people in the astrology, to have people doing signs of the stars again.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This was so lovely. I really enjoyed talking with you. It was so easy to talk. It's the ninth house placement. I'm sure that made that so easy. But thank you so much for having me.
Appearing on a spirit of matter thing. Yes, I can see how the synchronicities. Oh my gosh, I had the question of like, how would one see synchronicities in the chart? Is there a way to see that?
I not that I haven't delved into that, but that is very interesting. And now that you've said that, I will definitely be looking at that going forward. That would be really cool to see that show up somehow. And I'm sure it does.
It must, because every signification, every phrase of something that we see has a signification.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so it's got to show up somehow. It's got to.
So yeah, we could just go on and on.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for making the time to appear here. And yeah, I'm so excited to have you on my channel.
Thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it. It was such a nice conversation, and getting to meet you was a really beautiful ninth house experience.
Yeah, for me too. This is so amazing. It's like, I'm so happy that I'm doing this.
Yeah, I love what you're doing. And I think, keep going. I think it's so important to have a variety of voices and not just the same 5 astrologers that we hear from, and bless their knowledge. And I think that they're incredible, but it's nice to have a lot of other newer voices. And I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and I really liked the topics that you dive into and just discussing all types of things that don't get the light of day. And I think what you're doing is really important. And so I really admire that.
Yeah, I'm so lucky to connect with you. And it's like you're the second person who I meet, in the context of being interview, that tells me, oh, I've been listening to your podcast. And I'm like, oh, somebody's been listening. So
yes, I went and listened to the one that was on kink and horary with and I thought that was just so
wow.
Yes. Oh, that was such a great episode. I really enjoyed that, and I'm gonna keep an eye out for your future episodes for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm sure we will probably meet each other in the context of such interviews again.
I hope so. I definitely hope so. Thank you so much.
And you can also let me know if there's like a new things that's coming up for you. You can, this is also for you, also for people watching us and thinking, maybe people watching us in 5 years of like, how do you get on your show? If you're watching me now, DM me and you have a good chance to be here still.
Yes, exactly. Just reach out. It was so easy to arrange with you as well. So if anyone wants to be on, seriously, just DM her. She's very lovely, and it'll be a good conversation. I'm sure you won't regret it.
So yeah, thank you so much. And for my viewers, subscribe, like, share. Actually press the like, it helps the algorithm. Actually comment on my video if it's respectful. it helps people know to spread the knowledge. We need this help for the algorithm because it helps to spread the knowledge, and we get people, amazing people like Kira here, and this knowledge needs to be spread. Like, this is not just, when I began doing Spirit of Matter, it was just me being a little girl doing charts, but now it's like, oh my gosh, there's a whole community. This thing needs to be
And the
celebrated.
algorithm is an uphill battle. So really, for the people listening, give a like, give a share, give a comment. It really, really helps. And you deserve all of the growth for this as possible. And I wish nothing but the most success for you.
Thank you, for you too. And I'm sure you will. It's been so exciting. And I'm going to stop the recording right now.
Just go ahead.
So I'll see you in the next Spirit of Matter video.